Okay, so let's start on this. Ridiculous, truth aside. Okay, so this is quite, very interesting history of science madness in here. People still publishing papers about this. Wow, okay, right, so this is going to be about, at base it's going to be about metabolism of organisms and how that scales with their mass. Right, so an elephant uses more energy, right? Famously, sort of, they eat 100 kilograms of stuff a day or something like that, and destroy 100 kilograms as well. Not the best. Not sure what humans are like. We throw out a lot of bananas, I think, right? A lot of food spoilage. Ants don't eat as much, but there are lots of them. So that's an interesting question, right? So we've got all these tiny little things of a species, or you have not just one species, but all the little guys that weigh 3 grams or 4 grams or 5 grams. They have some energy budget, and so they have to take stuff in just to keep themselves alive and run around a little bit. So how do they collectively, how much stuff do they take? Do they take in more than the elephants at the other end, right? Or is it some magical equipartition thing where the big guys collectively are kind of like the same as the little guys, right? There's some sort of beautiful possibilities here for ecological systems and how things fit together, or are constrained or may or may not fit together. All right. Okay, so we're going to talk about these guys. Okay, yeah. So as I said, metabolism is sort of the big deal. We're going to have this kind of strange history of measuring exponents for this particular area. It goes back to the 1850s. Will be a tobacco plantation in France. Anyway, river networks. We'll talk about some other pieces, and then we're going to get onto biology. So this is going to be about data. Then we'll get to theories that have, where people have had disagreements with each other, amusingly. All right. Okay, so this is the sort of story we're going to get to. For some reason, 3/4 and 2/3 will be the people involved. 1/12 is the difference between these two numbers, but this is like, my kingdom for a 12th, right? So this is a big deal. This is ridiculous. I want a bunk thing. I did for a while try to make a bunk happen as I moved from slide to slide, but this is just really useless. Okay. I don't know if this is really true, but anyway, scientific integrity system, peer review, which is a disaster actually, of course. People are represented by 2 highly overlapping yet equally important. Oh my God, it's terrible. The independent scientists who review papers and the scientists who punish those who publish garbage. This is one of their stories. All right. Okay, so big range for organisms, and I'll show you that people have tried to connect this down to single cellular things. I guess no one's pulled out the Gaia hypothesis, which would be kind of fun, but they should be doing that. Maybe you guys do. Some of you might know about that, but that's James Lovelock's conception that the whole Earth is one big organism, which I guess is true in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, but that's different. Okay, so here's a shrew. So these guys are really small. 3 or 4, ego, right? Yeah. 3 or 4 grams for these guys, and maybe it's like 3,000 kilograms, 4,000 kilograms. Big units. So very different metabolisms and activity rates. And so there's a very nice thing in here as well, is that, right, these guys eat less, but their heart rates, and they live typically not as long, right? So the bigger organisms broadly, very roughly, live for longer time periods. Things like time to reproduction maturity varies as well in interesting ways. Although it's that said, you can still have a cockatoo that's 110 years old and repeats what your great-great-grandparents said, which usually is the profanities. So, they're not big. So this is a shrew. This is an elephant shrew, which is a very confused animal. Or our taxonomy. Yeah, anyway. Not such a big thing. But this is the big story, right? So that the basal, and I'll call it P, it's different things in different, in the literature, basal metabolic rate. So this is if you're sitting down, just taking it easy. So that's a problem with testing, right? So you can't have organisms running around. There's some beautiful stuff for, and we had this in PUCS, for maximal efforts. So there was a scaling result, right, which was that maximum velocity scaled as length of organism, which was true for aquatic species and land species, so it was pretty cool. Usually the maximum, a thing going as fast as it can, which is only for sort of 10 seconds for a lot of organisms, maybe, they burn up all the energy just sitting there waiting for go time. That seems to scale more like mass to the 1, right, using everything. Weightlifters, right, that result, that's more like mass to the 2/3, and the argument there is it's more like the cross-section of your body, right? So that's the maximal scaling. That's within humans, of course, within one species. But here we're going to go across many species, and the question is, what's this scaling, right? So if it was 1 is kind of the upper limit, that's fair. It shouldn't be greater than that, otherwise things would not be working very well. And you would think for a resting thing, the lower the better, whatever you can get away with, right? And of course, specific organisms take this to strange limits, right? We have sloths, which are super cute, and sleep like 23 hours a day or whatever it is, right? They run on not much. There's a super cool rodent, which is I think the Arctic squirrel, maybe in Alaska and Canada, which can get its blood down below freezing because is that right? It doesn't have, essentially has antifreeze, like the crystals can't form in its blood, which is, so there's a lot of adaptation. There are, of course, hibernating animals and all those sorts of things. Reptiles, right, which don't heat, they don't heat themselves, so they potentially have different scalings. And birds make for another thing as well. So we'll talk about these. So there's a prefactor. Often, physicists and many people don't really care about that. Physicists, I should say. A lot of people do. But the prefactor C seems to matter a little bit. And this is the ordering that kind of makes sense. So birds at the top, right? So birds are, latest bit of evolution in some ways, right? Had to have some dinosaurs beforehand, but they're doing a pretty difficult thing, and they burn a little more than mammals do. So this is us, the placental mammals, right? So we have the babies on the inside, or we bake them for a while on the inside. So eutherian mammals, we tend to have this kind of body temperature. I'm using Celsius for just. It's an aggressive act, I realize, but Celsius doesn't make sense anyway. It's ridiculous. All right, marsupials, right, with the pouch, right? So they put the baby in a pocket. So they, evolve in a different line, and it's sort of, and this seems to be kind of the story is, the argument is that that they're sort of just doing like flying is the piece here. This is the babies on the inside. This is babies in pockets, and they don't have to run as hot. I don't know if that's true, but they do seem to have their own prefactor. And then the monotremes, of course, great organisms in the mammal world. So these are mammals plus birds. The platypus and the echidna, right? So these are the only two running around. So these ones, they lay eggs, right? Which is just great mammalian action. So these two are cousins somehow. But anyway, that's the Australian porcupine basically, and it does the porcupine type things. It doesn't care about you because literally bite me, right? Okay. Although I think porcupines are much more. They just don't care. It's like it's just not a possibility that someone will try to eat them. Humans are very clever though. Okay, so anyway, so these guys seem to have a lower temperature. But I don't know, the variation, like how many, like platypuses and echidnas, there's not a lot of, when it comes to exponents, these are, I don't think there's really a scaling that you could get out for these. There's not enough variation in body size. All right, anyway, interesting thing. Okay, so this is what you might expect. Dimensional analysis, you just, you get your envelope out, you don't even really and then you put it down because you don't really need it. So you'd expect that you've got a heat balance issue, and you're giving off heat, right? So this is why the military can find you in the middle of the night, which is unfortunate, because you light up, or at least on TV, but it is true actually, right? You've got infrared and you're giving stuff off. We complicated things, right? So we give off heat in various ways, and humans are good at sweating, right? When we run a little, when we work harder, which is not what a lot of other organisms do. Dogs have to deliver it out the front with the tongue, which is just a difficult maneuver. But they're always happy, so it's okay. So it might be proportional to surface area, because regardless of sweating and all those sorts of things, everyone gives off heat, right? Infrared. So surface area, we're going to assume spherical organisms, but not really spherical organisms, at least organisms that scale isometrically, right? So snakes are not in here. So this is volume to the 2/3, which density, assuming density doesn't change too much, the density of a shrew is similar to the density of an elephant. Obviously these things, but it's not going to scale in a way, right? The density will change, but not dramatically. So that you would have this 2/3 scaling. And so that's the old idea. So we'll just get to so not quite the spherical cow, yeah. You might expect log normal fluctuations, right? So that if you had some big scaling law and you've got all these masses here and there's some variation around it, of course, that if we look at the residuals around that scaling law, we'd get a normal distribution. It's in log space. So that's nice log space, log 10. Lots of edits. So we have a normal distribution, and that will be good, right? So that's fine. And then there's again, we reach into the big box that says physics, and we pull out the Stefan Boltzmann law, a very famous result, which is that if we've got a black box, some shape, this is a different kind of black box to the problems we have now, but this is it's radiating, it's giving off heat, it's absorbing as well, but it's giving off heat. That the way that that happens, the rate at which that happens is proportional to surface area, and then temperature to the 4th, right? And so we'll think temperature doesn't matter too much, right? Here we're not going to vary too much, but surface area is the big story. So it would fit, and this is an old argument, right? This is sort of the first argument that people have. And then, if you're working harder, you have to cool off in different ways. But actually, this is what people think, right? So it's now people have thought this from the 20s really through into the 2000s, but there's a lot of, then it just exploded, right? No one had a theory for it. A theory comes along that purports to explain it all, and then everything explodes. So we'll get to that. But it turns out the data supporting this is not good, and that's going to be the first place we'll get to. So 3/4. So that's pretty weird. It's pretty strange. It's a difference of a 12th. It's higher than 2/3. So that means that biology is perhaps forced to produce organisms that run a little hotter than you'd expect by scaling. Maybe they do for larger mammals. That might be true. Really getting bigger. Gravity matters in interesting ways. Somehow they run a little hotter than they need to balance heat. All right. So I'll just finish with this sort of beautiful thing, and then we'll go into it. And so the actual exponents perhaps doesn't matter here, right? But let's just believe for a little bit. There are various claims associated with it. So the number of capillaries that we have scales as mass to 3/4. So that matches with this idea of energy usage, because you're sitting there running, and that's where the little engines is where things are happening. Mitochondria might be another piece in here as well. People have measured that for organisms. Time to reproductive maturity. These are all incredibly rough things. You can see that someone's come along and made them into fact, but a quarter power here. So it's a slow scaling, but it's growing. Heart rate decaying, right? So bigger things have lower heart rates. This is true, and as you grow actually, right, your heart rate goes down. Cross-section of the aorta is another claim, right? So obviously lots of aortas being cut up and looked at by people. Mass to the 3/4. This is so-called Damus law, population density. Wow, I'm going to add that one. This is a long list of nature and science papers as well, Damus law. It's known as Damus law. There are a couple of pieces that fit very nicely. So population density times the metabolic scaling. If you put mass to the 3/4 times mass to minus 3/4, mass to the 0. So that is this kind of idea that organisms of different sizes consume the same amount of energy, right? There are fewer of the, and it's more than that. It's per unit area, right? So there are fewer elephants. They're spread out more, lots of mice. But when you look at how much energy they use per unit area, it's the same. That's a claim. This is all claims, all claims. This is quite a beautiful thing. But let's say lifespan grows as mass to some power, average heart rate goes down. Then you multiply those things together. And this actually does seem to be roughly true, right? So it's about, this is a beautiful idea, right? This is a beautiful idea. People write poems about this. They get very excited. It is roughly on the order of 1 billion and a half heartbeats per organism, right? That's what you got. So if you're an elephant, just run it, the whole thing runs slower, yeah? And if you're a mouse, you're just hammering through the clock. So whether a mouse thinks it's basically living the same life as an elephant, I don't know. I'll see if I can find that poem. Okay, yeah, 1.5 billion. Okay, so this is what we're going to talk about, the Church of Quarterology. This is an interesting thing. And eventually we'll get to how does this all make sense, and beautiful theories that are wrong, and beautiful theories that might be right. Okay. All right, this is fun. Yes. And office hours will be over now too.